The Mill River Flood. How the richest men in western Massachusetts drowned their workers and called it an act of God. May 16, 1874, Williamsburg, Massachusetts. Part 1. The Valley That Made Them Rich. 5:30 a.m., May 16, 1874, Williamsburg, Massachusetts. A man named Joel Bassett climbs out of bed. He pulls on his boots, walks to the window. Outside, the world is damp and cold. It rained hard the night before. It has been raining on and off for days. The ground is saturated. The fields are dark with standing water, and the Mill River, running through the narrow valley below his house, is high, higher than it should be. Bassett is the dam keeper. That is his job, his one job. Watch the Williamsburg Reservoir. Make sure nothing goes wrong. He has held this position for 3 years. In that time, he has learned to read the dam the way a sailor reads the sky. He notices when the water sits too high, when the clay face looks wrong, when the seeps along the base run darker than usual. This morning, what he sees makes his stomach drop. The reservoir is full. The water is within inches of the top of the earthen wall, closer than Bassett has ever seen it. And along the base of the dam, water is weeping through the earth. Not the usual slow seepage, something faster, something wrong. Bassett walks to his employer's house, Emery Wells, one of the mill owners who built the reservoir. He knocks on the door, tells him what he saw, tells him the dam looks dangerous. Wells looks at him. Then Wells goes back to bed. By 7:20 that morning, the dam will be gone. 139 people will be dead. 5 towns will be destroyed. And the men who built the dam, who knew it was unsafe, who had been warned, who had chosen money over maintenance for years, will escape without paying a single dollar of compensation, without spending a single night in jail. This is the story of the Mill River Flood of 1874. It happened 15 years before Johnstown. It killed fewer people. It made fewer headlines. And today, almost nobody remembers it. They should. Part 2. The Dam They Built. To understand what happened in the Mill River Valley, you have to understand what the valley was and what it meant to the men who owned it. The Mill River runs south through Hampshire County in western Massachusetts. By the mid-19th century, this modest stream had become one of the most productive waterways in New England. The reason was simple. The river dropped sharply over several miles. That drop generated hydraulic power, and that power drove mills, looms, and spindles. The towns along this stretch were company towns: Williamsburg, Skinnerville, Haydenville, Leeds, Florence. The men who ran these towns, Skinner, Hayden, and their partners, had built empires on the Mill River. They lived in fine houses on hills above their factories. Their workers, mostly immigrant families, lived in rows of company cottages on the valley floor. The owners ran the banks, the churches, the local governments. They were, in the language of their time, the leading citizens of Hampshire County. And in 1865, they built a dam. The Williamsburg Reservoir was meant to solve a problem every mill owner knew. The river didn't always cooperate. In summer, when water ran low, mills had to slow or stop. In drought years, production collapsed. The solution was storage. Build a reservoir, fill it during wet seasons, release water as needed. The man they hired to design it had experience in mill construction, but no formal training in hydraulic engineering. In the 1860s, this was not unusual. It was also not safe. Before construction was even finished, an engineer named Rufus Graves came to inspect the site. His report was not subtle. The foundation was insufficient. The puddle core was poorly constructed. The outlet pipe was improperly fitted. The spillway was too small. The dam, in his professional opinion, was unsafe. The mill owners thanked him for his report and built the dam anyway. It was completed in 1866. By 1867, it was already showing signs of distress. Seeps appeared on the downstream face, water finding its way through the embankment. Workers patched them. More seeps appeared. Workers patched those too. But patching the downstream face was like putting bandages on a patient with internal bleeding. The problem wasn't the surface. The problem was what was happening inside, where nobody could see. Joel Bassett watched the dam through 3 years of seasons. He was not an engineer. He couldn't calculate seepage rates. But he had eyes and instincts. He told the mill owners something was wrong. They told him not to worry. He told them again. They told him it was fine. On the morning of May 16, 1874, he told them one last time. Emery Wells went back to bed. Part 3. The morning of the 16th. At 6 a.m., Joel Bassett is back at the dam. The situation has not improved. If anything, it is worse. The seeps on the downstream face are running harder now. Some of them are carrying fine particles of soil. This is called piping. Water moving through the embankment, carrying material with it, creating voids, weakening the dam from the inside. This is how earthen dams die. The mill owners send word. Open the outlet valve, drain the reservoir, reduce the pressure. It was a reasonable instruction. It might have worked, except the outlet valve was not functioning properly. The wooden culvert surrounding it had rotted. The pipe had shifted. When Bassett tried to open the valve, he could get it only partially open. Water trickled out, not nearly fast enough. The men worked frantically. The water level continued to rise. At approximately 6:45 a.m., a section of the downstream face began to move. Not crumble, not crack, move. The saturated earth, through which water had been moving for years, shifted as a mass. Bassett looked at it and understood that there was nothing more to be done. He turned and ran. But before he ran, he did something that would save hundreds of lives. He ran not away from the valley, but toward it. Down the road toward Williamsburg Village, shouting at every person he passed, "The dam is going! Run for the hills! The dam is going!" At 7:20 a.m., the center of the Williamsburg Reservoir Dam collapsed. The entire center section, perhaps 200 feet of dam, failed simultaneously, as if a hand had reached down and scooped it out. 800 million gallons of water released in an instant. The valley below had 60 seconds of warning. Part 4. The Flood. The wave that emerged from the breach was not simply water. It was a moving disaster, a churning wall of water, mud, ice, timber, boulders, and the wreckage of everything it touched. The Mill River Valley is narrow. In places, the hills rise steeply on both sides, compressing the flood into a corridor barely a quarter-mile wide. That compression increased the velocity, increased the force. The wave descended at speeds between 20 and 30 miles per hour, reaching heights of 30 to 40 feet in the narrowest passages. Williamsburg Village, a mile below the dam, was the first in its path. In the minutes between Bassett's warning and the arrival of the flood, perhaps a third of the village got to high ground. The others were caught. Those who were asleep, those who didn't hear, those who stayed to grab a child or a coat or a Bible. The flood arrived with a sound that survivors described as a continuous roar, like nothing they had ever heard. Not thunder, not a waterfall, not a train. Something in between all of those things, but louder and more terrible. It was the sound of a civilization being dismantled. The mill buildings along the river were struck first. Some held for a moment before the pressure overcame the masonry and they collapsed inward. Others were simply absorbed into the flood, their walls dissolving, their contents, looms, spindles, iron machinery weighing thousands of pounds, tumbling into the current. The company cottages fared worse. Wooden structures, built for economy rather than permanence. They offered no resistance. They were swept off their foundations and carried downstream, breaking apart as they went, their occupants struggling in the water among the fragments. A man named Henry James heard Bassett's warning and ran upstairs to wake his wife and children. He got 2 of his children out before the flood struck. His wife and youngest child drowned in the room where they had been sleeping. A woman named Sarah Bartlett climbed onto her roof as the water rose. She clung there for 2 hours until rescuers reached her. She was found alive, in shock, still holding the roof with both hands. The flood moved through Williamsburg in approximately 4 minutes. 4 minutes to destroy most of a town. Then it moved on. Below Williamsburg came Skinnerville, then Haydenville, then Leeds, then Florence. Each town struck harder than the last, each wave larger, carrying the wreckage of everything above. In Haydenville, workers who had been at their stations since early morning were caught in the flood. The brass works, built of stone, were seriously damaged. The workers' cottages near the river were gone. The pattern was the same in every town. The workers lived in the low-lying cottages near the river. The owners lived on the hills above. The flood came from the river. The calculus was simple and terrible. But one man changed what happened in the lower valley. His name was George Cheney. He was a milk collector. Every morning, he drove his wagon through the valley, collecting milk from farms along the Mill River Road. On the morning of May 16th, he encountered Joel Bassett running down the road. Cheney did not hesitate. He turned his horse and drove it as hard as it would go, down the valley road, ahead of the flood, shouting warnings at every farm, every house, every person he passed. The dam is broke. Run for the hills. The dam is broke. George Cheney was not a hero in the storybook sense. He was a working man with a horse and a road, and he understood that the only thing between the people below him and the flood behind him was how fast he could drive. He drove as fast as he could. Because of George Cheney, hundreds of people in the lower valley had enough warning to get to high ground. He received no reward, no medal, no official recognition. He returned to collecting milk. Part 5. What Remained. By noon on May 16, 1874, the Mill River Valley had been transformed. The river itself was unrecognizable, a brown, sluggish mass clogged with debris from 5 towns. The valley floor, where mills and cottages and gardens and streets had stood that morning, was buried under several feet of mud, rocks, shattered timber, and twisted metal. The confirmed death toll was 139. 34 of the dead were children under the age of 15. The town of Williamsburg lost 1 in 5 of everyone who lived in the flood zone. In the days that followed, neighboring communities sent food, clothing, and building materials. The state of Massachusetts appropriated emergency relief funds. Volunteers came to help with the recovery, the clearing of debris, the burial of the dead. The mill owners contributed to the relief effort. William Skinner and Joel Hayden both gave money. They were praised in the newspapers for their generosity. Nobody mentioned the dam. Part 6. The Reckoning That Wasn't. The question of responsibility was not complicated. The Williamsburg Reservoir Company had built a dam that multiple engineers had warned was unsafe. They had received specific, detailed warnings. They had made cosmetic repairs while ignoring the fundamental problems. They had employed a dam keeper who reported his concerns on the morning of the failure and had been sent home. The dam had failed. 139 people were dead. 5 communities were destroyed. A grand jury was convened to investigate. The mill owners had lawyers. They had political connections. They had the deference of a society that believed men of property did not commit crimes. The grand jury declined to indict anyone. Civil suits were filed. Families of flood victims sought damages for wrongful death and property destruction. The cases dragged through the courts for years. The company's lawyers contested everything, delayed everything, exhausted everything. In the end, the Williamsburg Reservoir Company paid small settlements to some victims, nothing close to what the losses represented. No officer of the company was ever convicted of a crime. No officer ever served a day in jail. The legal system looked at what had happened in the Mill River Valley and found, at the end of all its deliberation, that it was essentially no one's fault. The rain had been heavy. The reservoir had been full. The dam had been old and imperfect. These things happen. It was, if not exactly an act of God, than at least an act of nature, of circumstance, of the unpredictable complexity of the physical world. This was not true, and the people of the Mill River Valley knew it was not true. But knowing it was not true and being able to do anything about it were two different things. For people without money and without power. Part 7. The Pattern. In 1875, Massachusetts passed one of the first dam safety laws in the United States. The law required state inspection of dams above certain sizes. It gave authorities the power to order repairs to unsafe structures. It was a beginning. But this should not be confused with justice. The people who died in the flood did not die so that dam safety law could advance. They died because wealthy men built a dam badly, maintained it negligently, and ignored warnings that were clear, specific, and repeated. 15 years later, the South Fork Dam above Johnstown, Pennsylvania failed. 2,209 people died. The dam had been modified and poorly maintained by the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, a private association whose members included Andrew Carnegie and Henry Clay Frick. Engineers had warned that the dam was unsafe. The warnings had been ignored. No one was held accountable. In 1972, the Buffalo Creek Dam in West Virginia failed. 125 people died. The dam was owned by Pittston Coal. The company called it an act of God. The pattern does not end. The specifics change, the country, the industry, the era. But the structure of the disaster is always the same. Private owners, known risks, ignored warnings, dead workers, insufficient accountability. Epilogue. The Mill River still runs through Hampshire County. The towns that were struck by the flood of 1874 still exist. They are quiet New England communities today, smaller than they were in the industrial era. In Williamsburg, there is a historical marker near the site of the old reservoir. It tells you that the dam failed here on May 16, 1874. That 139 people died. It tells you where the dam was. It does not tell you why it failed. The names of the 139 people who died are preserved in historical records. Patrick Hennessy, Mary Sullivan, Elias Bridgman, Sarah Graves. They are not on any monument that most people will ever visit. The names of the mill owners are preserved more durably. Haydenville is still named for the Hayden family. The men who owned the dam that killed 139 people are memorialized in the geography of the valley they helped destroy. On the morning of May 16, 1874, Joel Bassett walked to the window of his house, looked at the dam he was paid to watch, and saw that something was terribly wrong. He told his employer. His employer went back to bed. At 7:20 a.m., the dam failed. Bassett ran down the road ahead of the flood, shouting warnings to everyone he passed. He saved lives. He was not trained for this. He was not paid for this. He was a dam keeper, and there was no more dam to keep. So he ran, and he shouted, and he did what he could. George Cheney drove his milk wagon as hard as a horse could run and warned the lower valley. He saved more lives. Then he went back to collecting milk. The people who died in the Mill River Valley died because wealthy men built a bad dam, ignored warnings that it was bad, and made decisions about safety from a comfortable distance, from the hillside houses where the flood could not reach them. 139 dead, 5 towns destroyed, not one criminal conviction, not $1 of meaningful compensation. And the valley is still named after the men who owned the dam. Remember the Mill River.